Welcome, everyone. This is Pam Ostrowski. I'm the 1NService leader, champion, and your host today. I'm also the CEO of Service Organization Strategies, and I work with IT vendors and IT channel partners on services, basically, whether it's development of services, marketing, sales, training, whatever it might be, to really help IT channel partners and vendors grow their services business. Over the last 32 years, I hate to admit that, I've worked with HP and Cisco and Polycom and 3Com and Extreme Networks and all of their channel partners, several of which are who happen to be on the line today. So a couple of notes for the Collabinar, which is a combination of the word collaboration and webinar. And the thought process there is that everyone will get a chance to participate at some level. You can either chat in the chat screen or just pop in, interrupt us, say, hey, I have a comment on that. And I will, at the end of each discussion that I have with the guest, I'm always going to pitch back to you guys to provide comments. So you will always have an opportunity to provide your comments. So the purpose really of what we're doing here with these Collabinars is to get IT channel partners in a virtual room together to figure out what's happening in the marketplace. What are best practices? Some of you have implemented certain services or have unique observations and time-tested tools and business processes that others can benefit from. In addition, one of the big challenges that I hear from all channel partners is about sales, leads, and marketing. And so you'll see that our content is really, today's is focused on why do we need to retool the sales force? What skills do they actually need versus what they've had maybe even in the past 2 to 5 years? So if you know somebody who can benefit from these conversations, or the advice or perspective, please, forward on the invitations that you get and ask them to join our LinkedIn and Twitter conversations as well. This is about collaboration, if I were to pick one word that really describes what 1NService is about. This session is 30 minutes, and we do have a 15-minute networking time after this, so that if you have specific questions or things that you want to make sure that you ask someone but you didn't get a chance to, this will give you the opportunity to actually do that at the end. So just a reminder that if you have something you want to share, like a PowerPoint or something like that, I can turn over control to your desk so that you can then share the PowerPoint or the data or whatever. So that's part of the collaboration. So here we are. It's October 2016. Every single person who's on this line is thinking about 2015, I should say. 2016 is right around the corner. And so the question is, do you have a sales force that's ready for the dynamics that are happening in 2016? And so today, we're going to start the conversation about the 3 reasons why your IT company's sales skills have to be retooled. And what that does is we're going to make sure that can help you to decide how best to prepare your sales force for 2016 and for increased revenue and increased profitability. So my guest today is John Riley. John is president of Opvia, and he's been in IT now for over 25 years and had many different roles, the latest of which is as VP and CTO at a solutions integrator who was focused on data center technologies and unified communications from Cisco, HP, EMC, VMware, and others. So all of those vendors everyone here is familiar with. Welcome, John. How are you today?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Glad to have you. I appreciate you taking the time. The title of this slide is Got Skills, because if you think about your sales force today, one of the biggest things that we uncovered in the last Collabinar was that the group identified several trends, a few of which are pretty scary. One was that we have some declining margins in certain services, right, because it becomes table stakes. And then zero growth in others, and then some growth in even others. But as that model evolves, the sales force's ability to sell those services and how you sell them also has to evolve. And I don't know that we're convinced that that's actually happening. So, John, I want to kind of level set here and ask you at the beginning, and then I'll throw it out to the group. Which services do you see that still carry a pretty good margin and would introduce new revenue streams?
Sure. So the services I have to answer that question maybe a little differently.
Okay.
Not many of the legacy services do I see still carrying a good profit stream. It's really more, if you think of some of the traditional services like implementing networks and IP communications at data centers and whatnot, it's really the more esoteric services around that, such as security, automation, private cloud, etc. But, and actually this is where I see most of the, it's really the newer services or the newer types of services that are generating most revenue. So big data, again, security, automation, just kind of the whole, customers that are looking at getting into the, DevOps agile type of model. So, again, they're looking at a more of a web scale type of approach and digitizing their environment, if you will. So all the services that go with that, because again, at the heart of that is some pretty serious automation, orchestration, and so it's really those services that I find are not just maintaining good profitability, but actually have excellent profitability still.
Can we put a number around that by chance? I mean, or a range when we talk about profitability? It depends on how you implement it, right? But in general, what are we looking at for margins in some of these newer services? Do you know?
You know what, it's funny, I'm actually just pulling out the calculator as we ask me that. If I was to go by, it's interesting, take a look at one of the things, and that is big data. And there's a lot of conceptions around how much big data market's going to be over the next 5 years and 10 years. And one of the things that I actually saw from just a big data perspective was going to be in the neighborhood of a little bit over $1 trillion just around big data over the next 10 years. And if we kind of, divide that by 10 and add, roughly, I would probably apply about 10% of that to be very pessimistic around services. I think we're going to be in the neighborhood of, an additional $10 billion worth of net new services, up for the grabbing worldwide.
And that's in what time frame?
That would be a per year worldwide.
But starting when? Now?
It's ramping now quickly. I would say we'd probably start to see some of those numbers in 3 years starting, roughly.
Wow, so we better ramp up these sales skills. So before we move on to the sales skills side of things, does anybody on the line have any perspective on where they're seeing margins, whether it be in software development or in tracking some of these services and looking at optimizing how services staff, so the engineers, are used?
I can actually echo the earlier comment about DevOps actually having some pretty healthy margin to it, and also we're seeing a significant amount of growth and interest in having people that are able to manage really complex environments and everything that comes with it. With respect to kind of our software development side of the business, I would say that to be able to achieve any sort of reasonable margin nowadays, you really need to be able to design and architect a solution, an end-to-end solution. And so basically that means that if you're just hiring a senior developer or a junior developer, that's not going to really provide much margin for you. But if you have the ability to design, architect, and implement a solution, and ideally have that solution be aimed towards being a product that will continue to live and breathe, even if it's only an internal product for a customer, that's where we're seeing margin.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And Jim, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, with the IT channel partners that we work with, what we're finding is a real move away from, well, maybe not a move away from, but more of a commoditization around what I'll call traditional delivery services, whether that be installing a new phone system or a network or things like that. And the areas where the IT partners are actually finding better margins are in more proactive services. When I say proactive services, things like managed services or security, not physical security, but IT security, where what they're selling to the customer is more of an insurance policy as opposed to kind of time and materials hourly type services. And that's a real shift. And what we're also finding is that the skill set of the salespeople then is challenged for many of the traditional IT, more supply chain partners, because they're used to selling to the CIO and they're used to selling speeds and feeds. And the preventative security services, IT security services, or managed services are more like an insurance policy, and that's a completely different concept to sell and probably a different title or role that you're selling it to.
That's interesting, and it introduces a whole bunch of complexity for sure for the sales force, because just about the time they think they've got implementation and design figured out as to how to pitch that, we're going to change everything underneath that. So let's talk a bit about sales skills. Now, how do you know when you're not in alignment with what's happening with the sales force? Well, probably frustrated by looking at your P&L and going, why aren't we meeting quotas? The sales force is frustrated because they're not meeting the margins, which they may be compensated on. So that begs the question, what's missing? So what skill sets would you say, John, and then I'll throw it out to the group, are missing from our current sales reps? And you gave a huge list from, automation and big data and sized some of the opportunity there. If the people who are listening to this recording are thinking, I want a piece of that, but do I have the right sales skills? Do I have the right sales force? What are your thoughts on that?
Just from a sales skills experience, I would say two things. Number one would be research, and number two would be being able to have conversation at different levels. So what I mean by research is, there's two ways to approach any opportunity or any customer, and that is, find out, what's their budget. What do you have budgeted for next year? What are you working on? That's all incremental. That's, again, kind of a normal table stakes way of approaching accounts, and quite frankly, the easy way. Another way is zero-based budgeting. So in other words, what you're doing is doing research to find out what is the actual business working on, and what are some of the projects, or what are some of the areas that you can actually help without a budget being in place. So in other words, you're actually in a position to create the budget or create the the return on investment or whatnot to help that budget being created for a net new project. So that research usually puts you into different conversations with different audiences, and at the same time, it enables you to be a much sooner in the sale. So you're not quote number two, quote number three, or column fodder, as I like to call it. You're going to be there early. You're going to have higher level strategic conversations, and you're actually going to be in control over that opportunity and account versus incremental, which I find the vast majority of account managers are still doing.
Interesting. So here's the challenge. One of the statistics that I have shared in the podcasts that we send out is that the customer is going on websites, which is why my marketing fear for IT companies is so prevalent, is that they're going online and they're evaluating solutions. They're doing their research from, whatever research companies are out there that are providing data. They're looking at trends, and they're pretty much, data, Forrester says, 90% of the way through the sales cycle before they even call a rep. So what's a strategy for helping the rep? Is that a relationship, a rapport issue, or are there skills or ways? And I think there's a few people on the phone that will probably have comments on this. I'll let you go first, John. Are there ways to get them entered in earlier to the sales cycle, despite Forrester's research?
Yes, absolutely. And that is, research really is the one key avenue that a lot of account managers are going to need to focus on. It's interesting. I do a lot of training from an account manager perspective as well, and a lot of customers still ask for, I really want to get my account managers to a consultative selling approach. And I don't want to be mean, but I want to say, that's kind of 1995.
Yes.
That's really table stakes, and that's where you should have been literally 20 years ago. Now, what we really need our account managers to do is work from the goal backwards, or what a lot of people call today the business outcomes backwards. Find out what are the business outcomes, what are the strategic goals of the company or just a department to start with. In healthcare, what about ER? What are some of the strategic goals? So if they work from that backwards, they're going to be, again, very early in the opportunity. They are going to be really leading the conversation in many areas. And I'll just give you one quick example. I had a great experience some years ago with somebody who actually wanted to sell us training and us sales training, and it was interesting. But that person spent almost 3 months coming to us occasionally, asking us questions. What are our goals? What are our verticals? Where do we want to improve? Quite frankly, after 2 months, he was getting to be a little bit of a pain. But I'll tell you, 3 months later, he came back and, here's your goals. Here's how I can actually see you achieving them. Here's, in a worst-case scenario, that the percentage I think I can directly affect you. Here's the cost, and your return on investment is 6 months. I mean, you can't say no to those types of conversations. So that's how account managers can be early, really set the stage, really increase not just their revenue, but also profitability, because you're not in a knife-fighting game when you're at that level.
Right, good point. What about the folks on the call? Does anyone want to speak to what sales skills? So if you could look at a sales force and determine what's the one skill that you think sales reps are missing that could make a significant difference in service revenue growth, as an example.
Hi, it's Jim from Promise. So I would double down on the research answer. If you look at the decision-making process that most senior managers go through, and part of that they are self-educating via the web, by the time they get to the rep, they're probably in the 6th or 7th step of a 10-step process.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it and you say, well, what's the first question the senior executive is asking? Something happens, an event happens in their business, or something comes to their attention, and the first question they ask is, do I have a problem? And then the second question that they ask is, well, maybe I have a problem, but it may or may not be worth investing further resources to investigate it further. Right? Is it a significant problem or an insignificant problem? And then once they go to the next step and they say, well, okay, well, if it's a significant problem, what are the different ways of solving this problem, right? We're not product or solution specific at this point. There might be, 5 different conceptual ways of solving the problem. And then the next step beyond that is, okay, well, which approach, which solution method is probably the best fit for our budget, our organization, whatever my constraint criteria are. And then once they get to that step, now they're at, well, which vendor, which group of vendors sells those types of solutions. That's when now they're in contact with the traditional sales rep. And as John pointed out, if you expect to make good margins and you want to have a good shot at that business, that's too late, right? That's too late at the point at which the customer is reaching out to you or you're in contact with that customer to have any influence over shaping that envisioned solution that the customers come to. And the really interesting part about that is oftentimes left to their own devices, of all the different approaches that the customer could take, oftentimes they come to the wrong conclusion. Like they come to a symptom addressing solution method as opposed to a root issue addressing method, because they don't have the subject matter expertise in this area that the well-educated, well-researched sales rep could bring to the table. But they need to get to that executive sooner in their process in order to have influence and shape that outcome. And when I say shape it, that's not like the evil salesperson kind of taking control over the customer's outcome. If you're a really good rep and you've really done your research as per the example that was just given, then you should be bringing tremendous value to the table and helping to educate the customer about, well, what is the best solution approach for solving the root problem that they really have, right? And oftentimes what you'll find with senior executives is they see the symptom and they're trying to address the symptom, but they don't have the subject matter expertise to really get to the upstream problem that really should be the thing that they should be looking at addressing. That's the value that a well-educated, well-researched rep could bring to the table.
So that actually is a great segue to the next conversation point, which is who's got the right training for the skills your sales rep needs? There's lots of training out there, and I've actually delivered some of it myself. I think there's other people on the line who do the same thing, and we think about how people react to that, right? So, David Sandler has a book, You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bicycle at a Seminar. And so you do, and I would substitute workshop. You bring them into this account planning workshop and you teach them how to create an account plan, and you talk about target markets and SWOT analysis. I mean, this stuff's old. It's 25 years old. So the challenge I have seen is that we don't really have a lot of new options about how to have the kind of conversations, Jim, that you've just mentioned, and John, what you've mentioned. So, John, I'm going to throw it out to you. Training seems to be an obvious solution. Who's out there that can help these poor sales reps who, the ground is shifting underneath them right now?
Yes, and unfortunately, there's actually few companies out there. There are hundreds of sales training companies out there, and believe me, I think I've probably interviewed half of them. And there's very few that really know how to, sell in the 21st century, really. Before I mention just a couple ideas, I mean, one of the things that you do want to look for is, somebody who, as I mentioned, can come in, understand exactly what you're trying to accomplish specifically, not just increase revenue. What verticals, what regions, what type of, skill sets do you currently have? Incorporate, training and, some of the new hire, type of conversations and really tailor something for you. I mentioned, we have to do a lot of research and approach our customers, in a very, of course, consultative or dynamic way as to what they need. So should we train our salespeople. So, I think a sales company coming in there with, similar to what I received once, 21-step process with 14 sub-steps, and it was just a pure, utter waste of a week. And it wasn't, the only thing that was really tailored was, the logo and a little bit of verbiage. So that approach is needed specifically to each partner. Now, who can actually deliver that? I mean, there are a few out there. There's a plug I'll have to give for Firefly. I mean, Firefly is a company that I do a lot of work with, and we actually do specifically that, and really focusing on what do you not know versus, what do you already know, and how can you actually specifically apply this to your customers. So we actually work even on a one-on-one basis with customers. The last thing I'll mention here, since it's already gone so long, is one of the first things that we usually do is we actually train the sales management and vice president of sales first and get their complete buy-in long before we train the account managers. This way, the sales management and the leadership can then reinforce what's being taught on a daily and weekly basis. That's crucial to the success. And actually, just as Jim mentioned, or I think you mentioned, you can't train, in a seminar or in one workshop. It has to be a daily, weekly enforcement afterwards.
And that's actually Sandler's philosophy, is it's all about reinforcement education. So ultimately, I think that's where customers stop, or IT companies stop, is, they go to training every year, which is crazy, once a year, and then, we ask them how they're doing. It's like, that's not reinforcement. So let me toss it out to the group here. Does anybody have or know of any other training companies that might help sales reps with some of the business basics? Or do you know of other ways that perhaps you have helped your sales reps understand how to make this migration?
That's Jim from Promise. So I don't have any particular company brands to plug, but I would reinforce what John said, which is, the idea that you're going to send sales team to a one-week seminar and they're going to walk away fully competent to execute a new sales strategy and having learned fundamentally new skills is silly, right? And so in addition to kind of getting the sales management team trained first, which I think is certainly critical, you have to get executive management support that they're not just investing in a one-week seminar. That's not sales. That's not an investment in sales training. An investment in sales training is a 6-month or a year-long process. Like, if you really want to fundamentally shape and change salespeople's behavior and they're relatively unfamiliar with the concepts or strategies that you're trying to teach them, it literally has to be something where once every couple weeks or once a month at the absolute least frequent, you have to revisit these concepts, check with the sales team for how well and consistently they're executing them, have that support from sales management, and then measure the results and give the salespeople an opportunity to provide feedback back to the trainer saying, this is working for me, this isn't working for me, I think I'm mastering this part I'm struggling with. But even before you get to training the sales team, you really have to get executive support to say a true investment in sales training looks a lot like a true investment in engineering training. right? You don't send an engineer to a 3-day seminar on new technology and then you're done with it for a year, right? Like that would be silly. But that's exactly how a lot of organizations approach sales training.
Absolutely.
So you really have to, if you do want to help your sales team make this transition into this new method of selling, then you have to understand it's a fundamentally new skill set, just like the investment. And that's the really interesting part, is none of the technology partners that we work with would ever think about sending a technician to a 3-day course and then turning them loose in a customer environment to install a complex data center solution, right? That would be insane.
Have at it.
And yet they do exactly that with the salespeople. And so I think to be really effective and to expect your salespeople to master what you're acknowledging are fundamental new skill sets and completely different approaches, you really have to be willing as an organization to make that same investment. And so, you know, if I were considering engaging a sales training company, you know, the first questions I'd be asking is, you know, what are your expectations in terms of how long this engagement is going to be like and what's going to be like? And the example that was just given, you know, the 25-step process and 14 sub-steps, and we're done in, you know, 3 days, and then everybody gets their, you know, certificate or something, and then there's no follow-up and no reinforcement and no measurement of actual results or change behavior. That's just a waste of money.
Yep, totally agree. Colin, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I do, Pam. My only comment was that I think probably some of the most valuable sales training can be done is not really what you'd consider sales training. I think the value is getting salespeople to think more like content marketers, because that is a great way to get yourself involved in the conversation earlier on. John made the great comment that consultative selling is table stakes, and I agree. But it seems like not that many salespeople are actually proactive about it and using LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever various channels that they can to proactively be consultative, so that maybe their content is what's getting found when people are doing their research online, or if it's not, when they go to look up their company or that individual, there is actually a library of knowledge that has been communicated online. I think that's an important thing to consider.
That is an excellent point, and I'm actually writing it down. I think that's worthy of its own either podcast or webinar about. This is very frustrating coming from a marketing perspective, that social media is table stakes. You have to be engaged in social media, yet I can't tell you how few IT channel partners, solutions providers, vendors actually participate in a conversation, or how they use it is to say, hey, check out this, you know, we're going to a webinar, or there's chatter about, you know, oh, this conference is great. But it's not about true, real content that's meaningful, that stimulates conversation and engagement. So I'm going to take that note. Thanks, Colin. I appreciate it. For the purposes of time, we have to move on to the actual 3 reasons why your IT company needs to retool its sales skills, because we put John on the line to make sure he had all 3. So I want to give him the opportunity to outline what those are. So John, I'll hit the button and go for number 1 if you can help me fill out each one of these. And for folks at home, please be sure to write these down. That's how we commit things to long-term memory. So I am not going to write them down for you. John?
Sure. Just 3. I had 24 listed here, actually.
Oh, no, you always go with odd numbers. So you either have to have 23 or 25, but we're going to stick with 3 today, okay?
Okay. The first one is, it's a couple of these are more strategic, but the first one is maintain relevancy within your customer account. If you're just selling commodity services, you know, how are you becoming relevant to, or more relevant to them, providing value, and quite frankly, relevant to the business? So maintain relevancy. That's key. Number 2 is quit being column fodder. So in other words, try to be first. With that, or another way to phrase this is, you know, always look for that strategic high ground. And if you start with the goals of the business, you know, those business outcomes first, identify who those audiences are that are actually the stakeholders of those goals and business outcomes, then you're going to be first. And at the same time, you're going to maintain relevancy. Third, this is probably the most important one of them all, grow profitability. So how are you going to do this with commoditized services? Of course you're not. So once again, if you go towards business outcomes and start there, if you're maintaining your relevancy within the actual success of that company, and again, their projects, goals, or specific outcomes they have, you're going to be in an entirely different conversation around both products and services. And the products and services will literally be, oh, by the way, yeah, here's what you need to actually achieve these goals. So this is where your profitability will drastically increase, is when you're able to change that conversation and that audience. So number one, maintain relevancy. Number two, get there first. That's strategic high ground. Number three, grow your profitability.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And hopefully it was worth the wait for us to get there. But the important thing here is that, those are three excellent high-level objectives for any sales force in increasing sales skills. So what we'll do as a promise out to the group is to make sure that we do deep dives. So you'll be looking for deep dive emails that talk about each one of those potentially. So I'm going to ask the final question, and hopefully some of the other folks will join in for a quick response, which is truth or consequences? Do you guys remember that? It's a really old show. So what are the consequences of not retooling your sales force's skills, not building those three core foundational elements that you just spoke about, John? What will happen to companies who don't think this way and start implementing now for the trends that you mentioned around big data in particular, but security, automation, orchestration, DevOps? What will happen?
That one's a really simple one, and unfortunately I've seen probably at least a couple dozen instances of this already. Yeah, you will no longer exist. And that proposition is happening. That consequence is much more rapidly showing itself than it was even just 10 years ago. That's
alarming. Anyone else have any observations from that? Or how important is revamping your sales schools, retooling, I believe was the word we used, to make sure that you're in the game, so to speak?
Yeah, it's Jim from Promise. I think there's not much to add there, except to say we see it with our channel partners, the channel partners who are making the transition to more proactive ways of engaging with their customers earlier in the thought process for the customer, or even bringing them new concepts or ideas for how they can help them improve their business. They're winning, and they're growing, and they're doing very well. And the customers who are struggling, the IT solution providers, the technology partners who are struggling to make that transition, they're stuck in a legacy supply chain philosophy, and they're just trying to layer stuff on top of that. And you can even take a new solution set like managed services, but you can approach it with the same model as supply chain, and you're not going to get much further ahead. And so there really has to be a change in philosophy of the business to this new, more proactive way of engaging with the customers. And the ones who are doing it are growing, and the ones who are not doing it are shrinking. And at the end of the day, that ends at a very particular destination.
Very good point. And I just wanted to get confirmation, because that's my observation as well. And so we need to wrap up to stay with our time commitment. So first of all, thank you, John, and all of you on the call for chiming in either in chat or in live conversation. So I appreciate that. I want to make sure that you mark your calendars, although typically you will see an email from me about 2 weeks in advance of the next Collabinar. I don't like to send it out too early, but this gives you a chance to save the date. We do these Collabinars the first Wednesday of every month, so the next one is November 4th. And as promised, we're going to do a deep dive. The topic is really going to be around 5 ways to get your sales reps to be viewed as trusted advisors when selling services. So a little bit more on how do we actually make this happen, because I think there was a lot of questions around great, good idea, but now what? How do we make it happen? Also, be sure to listen to the upcoming podcasts on retooling your sales force, so a bit more detail about your sales force's skills your engineers, your SEs need in order to move forward with some of these trending technologies, And then also increasing billable utilization. So that little discussion about profitability. All of those will be coming to your inbox soon. If you want help in designing, marketing, and selling your IT services, or want to participate in these conversations, just join 1NService. If you go to this page, and you'll see this page as part of your emails, that you make sure that you engage with us and have just give me a call or send an email. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll hang out here and chat for a bit, and then we'll break, and we look forward to seeing you guys in a future Collabinar, or please feel free to engage via email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. So thanks again, John. Appreciate your time today and your perspective, and look forward to talking with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pam.
You're welcome. Take care.